If somebody could do that, please. Okay, let's go ahead and turn your Bible to Isaiah chapter 46. We will get to that in a little bit here. Let me find my clicker. We're going to dive right back into our series on theology. This is supposed to be the last lesson on this particular doctrine. And next week, my plan is to begin the doctrine of Christology, the doctrine of Christ. But tonight, we're going to finish up, if I can, studying about the works of God. Remember, we're talking about three things under this heading: God's creation, that He made the universe and everything within it; His preservation, that He sustains the universe and all within it; and His sovereignty, that He rules over the universe and all within it. Right now, we're finishing up with creation. And so last week we discussed the date of creation. We talked about the stark contrast between the extremely old earth idea that is required by the theory of evolution, that the earth is 45 billion years old, and then the contrast between that and the relatively young earth of the biblical creation account, which would be approximately 6,000 years old. What I want to do tonight is pick back up with some reasons from science why a belief in a young earth is not an unreasonable belief. Okay, so there's the contrast again. Big difference between 4 to 5 billion and 6 to 10,000. Probably a lot closer to 6 than 10 if you just take the biblical chronology. So we had talked about one clock that is sometimes used to try to date things. That is radiometric dating. We talked about some of the problems with the assumptions and why those dates can be wildly inaccurate. But let me give you some other clocks, if I might, some other things that we can look at, scientific explanations for a young earth. This list that I have here on this slide is a list of the 10 best off of the AIG website, Answers in Genesis. They have a website, the 10 best reasons to believe the earth is young. And I'm not a scientist, okay? Just that little disclaimer, as you know. But I'm just going to take us through these quickly, okay? The first is that there's very little sediment on the seafloor. If the earth was billions of years old, then there's a certain amount of sediment that gets deposited in the oceans every year. We know the rate at which it is deposited. If the earth was billions of years old, the sediment on the seafloor should be miles deep by now, but it's not. It's actually, on average, only 1,300 feet deep. And so that is a good indicator that the earth is not as old as evolutionists say. Bent rock layers. There are layers of rock that evolutionists, when they date these layers of rock, they say that these rock layers were laid down slowly over eons of time and they're millions of years old. And then you have, layer on top of layer. And the problem with that, one problem with that, is that there are places where all the rock layers bend together. And that seems a little odd, because that would only be possible if all those rock layers were laid down at the same time and they were all still soft so that they could bend. Solid rock doesn't bend, okay? Have you ever tried that? It breaks, okay? And so that's another reason to believe that what they're doing with dating those rock layers is inaccurate. Soft tissue and fossils. There was a scientist who was studying bones of Tyrannosaurus rex. Of course, evolutionists say that these dinosaurs lived 65 million years ago. Amazingly, she found in these bones soft tissues like blood vessels and things like that. And that one has really been hard for evolution to explain, because obviously there's no way that soft tissue could survive for 65 million years. That's just a silly idea. The current temperature of the sun. The sun is getting hotter over time due to changes in its core. And so if you extrapolate that backward, the sun would have been significantly cooler billions of years ago, which would have caused the earth to be frozen just at the time, supposedly, when life was evolving on the earth. That's a little bit of a problem. Then we have the rapidly decaying magnetic field. The Earth's magnetic field, which is, by the way, that's why you have northern lights and things like that, because the magnetic field is protecting the Earth from the solar wind, harmful radiation particles that would damage life on Earth. The magnetic field is decaying. At the known rate of decay, it couldn't be more than 20,000 years old at the most, which would mean that it should be, if the Earth was billions of years old, the magnetic field should be gone by now. We shouldn't have one at all. Then helium and radioactive rocks. These rocks supposedly, again, are millions of years old, but there's a problem. That is that helium, which is a byproduct of this radioactive decay, it leaks out of materials very quickly. It leaks out of rock very quickly. And so all the helium in those rocks should have leaked out in a period of no more than 100,000 years. But when they look at these rocks, they still have helium in them, which tells you that they couldn't be millions of years old. Then you have carbon-14 in fossils, coal, and diamonds. Carbon-14 has such a short half-life, just a few thousand years, that it should all decay in a few 100,000 years, but it has been found in fossils that are supposedly millions of years old. That doesn't work. Then we have short-lived comets. Comets, you know what comets are, right? You know, the little the things that have the tails on them, you know, as they go around the sun. And what that tail on that comet is the comet evaporating, okay? It flies around the sun and it's melting as it does. The comets, if the universe were billions of years old, the solar system was billions of years old, all the comets should have melted by now. There shouldn't be any comets left. The way that evolutionists get around that is that they suggest that there's this gigantic cloud of comet-like, rubble that's floating around outside the solar system, and every now and then one piece of that kind of comes in and makes a new comet. That's just totally made up. There's no evidence for that, but they have to make something like that up in order to make billions of years work. Then we have the salty, very little salt in the sea. The sea gets a little saltier every year. After 3 billion years, there should be 70 times the current amount of salt in the ocean as there presently is. And then DNA in ancient bacteria. They found is a salt crystal. They found these bacteria in salt crystals that were supposedly 250 million years old. But the DNA, which is quick to break down, the DNA in these bacteria were still intact. In fact, they were able to resurrect some of these bacteria, bring them back to life, if you will. They're called Lazarus bacteria. And again, the idea that you could bring back some bacteria after 250 million years is ridiculous. Okay, so that's the list of 10 from the AIG website. Here's a few others. I got most of these from Dr. Ricker. We were talking about this last week. And so here's some more good scientific reasons to believe that the Earth and the entire universe is young. Recession of the moon. The moon is moving away from the Earth at a rate of 1.5 inches in a year. So if the Earth were 6,000 years old, it would have moved 800 feet. That's no big deal. But 1.5 billion years ago, we would have a problem because the moon would be touching the Earth. That would be an issue. By the way, the moon can never be less than 11,500 miles away from the Earth, or the Earth's gravity would tear it apart. So obviously, the moon is a good evidence that the Earth is young. Okay, now just the fact that we have a moon is evidence of that. Existence of blue stars. Blue stars are too big and they burn too hot to last for more than 1 million years or so. And since no new stars are forming, we don't really see that happening out there in the universe anywhere, then there shouldn't be any blue stars left if the universe was billions of years old. That's another problem for billions of years. Young spiral galaxies. These spiral galaxies, like the Milky Way, they have these complex arms that come off of them. They look like a pinwheel. Well, the stars in these galaxies, the inner stars spin around the center faster than the outer stars. So after billions of years, there shouldn't be those pinwheel arms on those galaxies. It should just look like a disk, okay? But the fact that they have these arms on them shows that they're not that old. The smooth surface of Pluto. Pluto is doesn't really have much of an atmosphere or anything like that. So if it were billions of years old, it should just be peppered with craters. I mean, it should just look like, it's been just, bombarded by meteors and so forth. And yet, when they got a probe out there to Pluto, they found, amazingly, that the surface was relatively smooth, which shows that there must still be some internal heat within Pluto that is rearranging the geography of the surface and wiping out some of those craters. So the fact is there are other distant planets and moons that also show evidence of having heat in their cores still. There shouldn't be any heat in those cores that far away from the sun if they were billions of years old. And then we have remnants of supernovas. The gas clouds that are produced by supernovas should be visible for millions of years. But there are about 25 supernovas per year. At the present rate, somewhere around that neighborhood, 25 supernovas per year. We can only see about 200 of these clouds out there, so there's not that many out there. And then Saturn's rings. Saturn's rings are constantly raining down onto the surface of the planet. So the rings are either so the problem there is that the rings have to be a lot younger than the supposed evolutionary age of the planet. So if you're an evolutionist, you would have to say that Saturn itself is way, way, way older than the rings, and that doesn't make a lot of sense either. And then drawings of dinosaurs, which are found all over the earth and give a lot of evidence that, in fact, dinosaurs and people did live on the earth at the same time and were not separated by millions of years. Okay, so I had to go through that really fast, but hopefully that's helpful to show you that there's lots of reasons from science to believe that the earth is young. All right, let's go on to the kinds of creation. This is our last topic here under creation, the kinds of creation. The Bible tells us, Genesis 1, I read it to you last week, God created all living organisms after their kind. That phrase is repeated throughout Genesis 1:12. The earth brought forth grass, and herb yielding seed after his kind, the tree yielding fruit whose seed was in itself after his kind, and God saw that it was good. So plants reproduce each after its kind. Verse number 21 says, God created great whales and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. And God saw that it was good. So the sea creatures, the air creatures, they reproduce as well after their kind. And then Genesis 1:25, God made the beasts of the earth after his kind, and the cattle after their kind, and everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind. And God saw that it was good. Again, land creatures, the animals, all that kind of stuff. They all reproduce after their kind. God created all living organisms after their kind. What is a kind? That's the next question. And here's the definition from somebody named Graham. A group of organisms that can interbreed freely in nature. A group of organisms that can interbreed freely in nature. It is not directly the same. It's not a one-to-one comparison to the different levels of taxonomy. It's not the same necessarily as a genus, a species, or family. It could be any of those in certain instances for different animals. But the basic idea is that one kind cannot produce or change into another kind. Each organism belongs to its kind and reproduces only after that kind. All right, so for example, all right, you have dogs. You can breed different varieties of dogs, but dogs are going to produce dogs according to the dog kind. You cannot breed cats from dogs. And that makes sense. We all get that because that's what we see in the world around us, and nobody has ever observed one kind changing into another kind. However, evolutionists set aside reproduction according to kind, and evolution demands countless intermediate stages between kinds. Okay, so the idea of evolution is that there are lots of these evolutionary intermediaries called the missing links that would show one kind evolving into another kind. When evolution was first popularized by Darwin, late 1800s, that time frame, early 1900s, you know what? They were excited about the fact they were going to go out and they're going to dig in the dirt and they're going to, crack open rocks and they're going to find all these missing links. It's all there. We just have to go find it. Well, guess what? They've been digging around in the dirt now for 150 years, and they haven't found those missing links, those transitional forms. What they have shown is that the fossil record supports the biblical teaching of reproduction according to kind. For example, the Cambrian explosion. What is a Cambrian explosion? Okay, so if you look at the very bottom of the fossil record, okay, the supposedly at the bottom, the very, what they call the less complex organisms, they all just appear, okay? I mean, they just explode right there in those, and there's nothing before them, okay? Fully formed creatures that are complex in their own way, and nothing ahead of them, and so the missing links are still missing. And there's just not the evidence for that. Every now and then, by the way, you'll hear something in the media. Every now and then, evolutionists get excited about a possible transitional form that they think that they found. Although, when you dig into it a little bit more, no pun intended, you find out it really isn't a transitional form. But the bigger point is that there should be countless numbers of these transitional forms if evolution were true. And they're not. Okay, evolution also demands not just countless intermediate stages between kinds, but also genetic mutations resulting in the transformation of kinds. This would be the way that one kind would evolve into another kind, would be through genetic mutations, supposedly. But the problem there is mutations are rare. They are random and usually harmful to the creature, and they never result in new kinds. In fact, a genetic mutation represents a corruption of DNA. It represents a loss of the information contained in DNA, not an increase of the genetic information. So that's a problem, and evolutionists realize they have that problem, that genetic mutations typically would not result in changing one kind into another. So they came up. They have this other theory, which is called punctuated equilibrium. The idea that this evolution didn't happen slowly, but there were just moments in the eons of time. There were just moments when suddenly, somehow, without any real explanation, a creature just all of a sudden, boom! It just sprouted wings, or it just developed some new capability or feature relatively quickly, and not through slow process of genetic mutation. And that idea of punctuated equilibrium would also require fewer transitional forms. The only problem with that is, like I said, it's a fairy tale. Okay, when I was talking about that before, it is a fairy tale. Okay, that these creatures just one day here was this lizard, and all of a sudden, boom, it's flying through the air, woo, hey, well, look at me, Mom, It probably didn't happen quite that way, but, I mean, we know it didn't happen that way, but you get what I'm saying. Fairy tale. All right, let's move on. Evolutionists also claim that similarities between organisms indicate a common evolutionary ancestry. That's another supposed evidence for evolution. For example, maybe how many dissected a frog in high school? Oh yeah, how many said I loved dissecting a frog in high school? Not too many. How many said I hated dissecting that frog? Okay, some of you are on the fence about the frog anyway. You dissect that frog and come to find out that frog has lots of the same organs as a human, I mean, it's got a heart, and we have a heart. For that matter, it's got 2 arms and 2 legs and 2 eyeballs. Guess what? We have 2 arms, 2 legs, and 2 eyeballs. Does that mean that we are related to frogs? No. It just means that we and frogs came from the same mind of the same creator. Okay, so similarities of design between organisms just indicate a common creator who reused a proven design. Gave us 2 eyeballs in case something happened to one of them. We'd have 1 left. That's a good thing. And then finally, evolution, and this is important to understand, evolution is not the same as adaptation. Adaptation is sometimes called microevolution, and it happens. Nobody questions microevolution within species because God made room in the genetic code of an organism for considerable variation. But it's a whole other ballgame to say that one species can change into another. That would be called macroevolution. So microevolution is variation within a species, within a kind, okay? Macroevolution would be a species or a kind changing into another. But if you ever go to a natural history museum that teaches evolution, places like that, there is a common bait and switch tactic that's used because you'll go in there and you'll see displays of supposedly evolution in progress, and what they'll show you is they'll show you examples of microevolution, and then they just make this gigantic leap to macroevolution, or they make things up, that kind of thing. So, so let's understand adaptation is a kind's God-given ability to adjust to its environment. For example, Darwin wrote about the beaks of the finches on the Galapagos Islands. He noticed that these different finches had different size and shape beaks depending on their surroundings, the food they ate. Their beaks adapted to different environments on the island. That's just adaptation within a species. Back in England, when they burned a lot of coal, the soot from the coal turned the bark of the trees dark enough to where the white-peppered moths became black peppered moths because through natural selection, the black moths were more camouflaged and they survived better than the white, and they reproduced, and that's what happens. Okay, so that is adaptation, and it's possible because of the great variety that God put into the gene pool of that organism in the beginning. For example, if you breed dogs, okay? That would be artificial selection, would be breeding a dog on purpose, breeding certain traits for certain traits in a dog. By the way, even in artificial selection, the genes of a specific breed of dog have lost information, okay? They haven't gained it, okay? So there's a loss of information that selects for certain traits, but other than traits are discarded from that organism's DNA. But adaptation has limits, okay? So God put variety into the genes so that a creature could adapt to its environment, but there's limits. You can't breed a dog the size of a mouse or a house, okay? Because God did not build that amount of variation into the genes of dogs. All right, so in conclusion, science has validated the biblical teaching of reproduction according to kind. We see it all around us. It's evident, observable. Science has failed to validate the evolutionary transformation of kinds. Now, let's go to the second topic here under the works of God. Whoops, I forgot to advance my slide. There we go. Hopefully you got that. Let's go on to that. God's preservation. God's preservation. Let's define the term and discuss it. What is preservation? That is God continuously maintaining and sustaining all the things He has made. For example, Hebrews chapter 1 verse 3 says, "Who being the brightness of His glory and express image of His person, and upholding all things by the word of His power, when He had by Himself purged our sins, sat down on the right hand of the Majesty on high." So our Lord Jesus Christ, King of kings and Lord of lords, even at this very moment, is upholding all things. He didn't just create with the word of His power, but He sustains and He preserves by the word of His power as well. Acts chapter 17 says, "For in Him," that is God, "we live and move and have our being." You know what? That statement will blow your mind if you meditate on a little bit. That says you can't even move a muscle apart from God. Every little movement of your body, it is in Him that you live and that you move and that you have your being. Colossians chapter 1 verse 17 says, "And He is before all things, and by Him all things consist." The word consist means to hold together. And so not only did He create, but He also holds creation together. This brings us to an interesting little rabbit trail type of question. What holds the atom together? Because if you remember anything about atoms from physical science class or something like that, you know that an atom has a nucleus of positively charged particles called protons, and then oftentimes there's also these neutrally charged neutrons in the core of in the nucleus of the atom, and then it's surrounded by a cloud of negatively charged electrons. Well, so you have all these little positively charged protons in the nucleus, and according to the electromagnetic force, those like charges should repel. So what is it that holds all those little positively charged protons together? Why doesn't the nucleus fly apart? There are different names for whatever the answer to the question is. Really, nobody really knows what holds the nucleus together. It's got different names. The strong force, sometimes it's called atomic glue, or different things like that. There's different theories for it, but ultimately, the answer to the question is God. Okay, God is the one who makes it hold together. But what would happen if God let go? Well, actually, the Bible tells us what would happen if God let go. 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 10 to 12. It says, "The day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in the which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. The earth also and the works that are therein shall be burned up. Seeing then that all these things shall be dissolved, what manner of persons ought ye to be in all holy conversation and godliness, looking for and hasting unto the coming of the day of God, wherein the heavens being on fire shall be dissolved, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat." Okay, so basically, what's going to happen is one day God is going to remove His sustaining power from this present creation that He has made, and it is going to melt down. The result is going to be total nuclear meltdown. The elements are going to dissolve, okay? The heavens will be on fire. It's all going to burn up. It's going to it's going to be gone. It's going to be amazing. The whole creation, all the galaxies, the stars, the planets, this earth, your brand new car, it's all going to be a part of it, folks. Yeah, that big screen TV you just bought, it's gone. That boat that you don't own but you wish you did, it's going to be gone. Whatever else you can think of, it's going to be gone. Because God is going to just let go. I don't need this old creation anymore. I got a new one over here in the wings, just waiting to bring it in. So I just let this one go. Revelation says it's going to flee away. There will be no place found for it. Just going to disappear. Amazing, isn't it? So that's the definition. Now let's discuss this. God runs the universe according to natural laws that He has ordained. How does He uphold it? How does He preserve it? Well, part of that is He's built these natural laws into the universe, like gravity, stuff like that, and things operate according to His laws, with Him as the one being in charge. Okay, and therefore no being can exist and no event can take place unless God allows it. If God didn't want it to happen, He could simply remove His sustaining hand. So then the question becomes, is God then the author of sin? Because obviously there's sin in the present universe, and so, how does that work? And the answer to that question is an emphatic what? No, God is not the author of sin. The Bible makes that very clear. James chapter 1, verse 13 says, "Let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God." Don't blame God for the temptation that leads to your sin. For God cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempteth He any man. So God allows people to sin, but He does not approve of it. But since He has allowed sinful people for a time to live in the creation that He has made, He does not suspend natural laws in order to keep men from sinning. For the example of that would be, if a criminal fires a gun and hurts somebody, God doesn't suspend the natural laws that make that gun work, that cause that bullet to fly through the air, that cause it to cause harm to somebody else. He doesn't because if He were going to do that, if God were going to step in and He were going to stop things like that, what would He have to do? He would have to stop the present creation. Okay, He would have to bring it to an end. And so the reason that he doesn't is because of mercy. In mercy, God gives wicked men strength in life even when those gifts are misused to sin. If God wanted to end all the evil, he would have to bring the world to an end, and one day he will do that. But the reason he hasn't done it yet is because he's merciful and he's allowing people an opportunity to repent and be saved so that his ultimate purposes can be accomplished, which is to populate the new creation with a multitude of kings and priests unto God who have been washed from their sins in the blood of Jesus Christ. All right, here's a couple of important definitions, though, that go along with, the next topic, God's sovereignty. Let's go to the next one. This is our last topic for tonight, God's sovereignty. A couple of important definitions. First of all, we talk about sovereignty. We're talking about God's right to rule over his creation. And obviously, he has the right because he made it, he owns it, and he sustains it. So he has full right to rule over it. Matthew chapter 20. Is it not lawful for me to do what I will with mine own? Is thine eye evil because I am good? Romans 9, verse 20. Nay, but, O man, who art thou that repliest against God? Shall the thing formed say to him that formed it, why hast thou made me thus? He's the potter. He has the right to do what he wants to do with the clay. Okay, and so that's sovereignty. Now let's talk about providence. Providence is God's exercising his sovereignty by carrying out his plan and purposes for his creation. So I ask you to turn to Isaiah chapter 46. In Isaiah chapter 46, we have this prophecy about the Persian emperor Cyrus. Cyrus was not born yet. Okay, this Isaiah prophesied long before Cyrus ever lived. And yet, if you will turn back with me to chapter number 45, you will notice that God calls him by name. Thus, look at verse 1 of chapter 45. Thus saith the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have holden to subdue nations before him. And I will loose the loins of kings to open before him the two-leaved gates, and the gates shall not be shut. And so then there is a lengthy passage going on where God speaks to this coming emperor of the Persian kingdom, Cyrus, who would be the one who would make the decree to allow the Jewish people to return to their homeland, bringing the Babylonian captivity to an end. So here we have, in this prophecy of the coming of Cyrus, we have an amazing demonstration of God's providence at work, that God here was sovereignly orchestrating his plan for human history to bring a man to the throne who would do exactly what he wanted him to do, and even calls him by name. Now in Isaiah 46, God says this. He says, verse 9, remember the former things of old, for I am God and there is none else. I am God and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times the things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure. Calling a ravenous bird from the east. The ravenous bird there is descriptive of Cyrus. The idea there is that God can use even a wicked person to accomplish his will. There are other examples of that, by the way. For example, the whole book of Habakkuk is about the fact that God would use the wicked Babylonians to punish his people. And then, of course, he would bring judgment upon them as well for their greater wickedness. In the book of Exodus, God used a wicked Pharaoh to display his power in the deliverance of his people, because it was his will to judge Egypt. And therefore, according to Romans 9:17, he brought this man, this Pharaoh, to the throne that God knew would oppose him. And so he raised him up so he could fulfill his will, even through that opposition. All right, so going back to the passage, he says, calling a ravenous bird from the east, the man that executeth my counsel from a far country. Cyrus would do what God wanted him to do. Yea, I have spoken it. I will also bring it to pass. I have purposed it. I will also do it. Folks, don't ever get the idea that God's up in heaven wringing his hands trying to figure out how he's going to work all things out. That's not how it works, okay? God has a plan. He has counsel, and it stands. He does what he wants to do, and he brings things to his accomplished end. He declares the end from the beginning. He knows the end of the story before we get there. He's told us all about it, and it's going to happen exactly the way he said it would do it. Why? Because he purposes it, and he will do it. God has a plan that works, and He's working His plan. And that's really good to know. Take a look at this verse here. Psalm 115, verse 3. Our God is in the heavens. He hath done whatsoever He hath pleased. And then Ephesians chapter 1, verses 9 through 11. Having made known unto us the mystery of His will, according to His good pleasure, which He hath purposed in Himself, that in the dispensation of the fullness of times He might gather together in one all things in Christ, both which are in heaven and which are on earth, even in Him, in whom also we have obtained an inheritance, being predestinated according to the purpose of Him who worketh all things after the counsel of His own will. All right, so He works it out according to the counsel of His will. Now, the dispensation of the fullness of times that is referred to in that passage is talking about the final glorious outcome of His plan. In my series on dispensationalism, I talk about the dispensation and the fullness of times. That is the final dispensation. That is the time when the creation will be renewed, the new heaven and earth, and all things are going to be reconciled in that new heaven and earth under the headship of Jesus Christ. There will not be one person, one object, nothing in that new creation that will not be arranged under His authority. That is the counsel and will that God is bringing all things to. But in the meantime, in His sovereignty, God has determined to allow some things in this present creation, including the existence of sin, the free will of man, and the privilege of prevailing prayer. All right, God has allowed, He's not the author of sin, but He's allowed the existence of sin. He gives us a free will, and to some degree, He limits Himself according to the exercise of free will. For example, in Revelation chapter 3, verse 20, God says, Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come in to him and will sup with him and he with me. So in that passage, we see God's will is to come in. He's knocking and He wants to initiate a relationship, but He waits for people to respond out of their will and to open the door. The privilege of prevailing prayer, James 5:16 says, The effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. That means it actually does something. It makes a difference. It moves the heart and the hand of God. Now, although these things might appear to limit God's sovereignty, we also have to recognize He is always in complete control. And number one, He restrains sin and overrules it for His glory. Genesis chapter 20, God is talking to heathen king Abimelech about Sarah, Abraham's wife. God said unto him in a dream, Yea, I know that thou didst this in the integrity of thine heart, for I also withheld thee from sinning against me. Therefore suffered I thee not to touch her. So God restrained a possible bad outcome in that situation. Job, the Lord said unto Satan, Behold, all that he hath is in thy power, only upon himself put not forth thine hand. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord. Obviously, Satan is an instigator of sin. He's a tempter. And in this case, God, and we see God limiting the evil that Satan was allowed to do to Job. Psalm 76 and verse 10 says, Surely the wrath of man shall praise thee, the remainder of wrath shalt thou restrain. So God is a restrainer of the wrathful, sinful behavior of human beings. Genesis chapter 6, verse 3, the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh. Yet his days shall be 120 years. One way that God limits sin is by limiting the lifespan of the sinner. Now, before the flood, we know that people lived to 800, 900 years of age. Can you imagine how much wickedness and how evil a wicked person could become in that amount of time? I mean, they would become very adept at sinning. And so God limits the wickedness of the individual by limiting the lifespan. That's one way He does it. God also works providentially through the exercise of man's free will. Matthew chapter 23, verse 37, here the Lord Jesus is mourning over the city of Jerusalem. He says, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets and stonest them which are sent unto thee. How often would I have gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathereth her chickens under her wings, and ye would not. So what that passage says is God wanted to do something, but He couldn't do it because the people of Jerusalem didn't want it. And yet, at the same time that Jerusalem was rejecting their Messiah, that their will was running contrary to God's desires. At the same time, God was accomplishing His plan of redemption through the rejection of His people. Wow, isn't that amazing? That even though they were saying no to God, even through their own free choice to say no to Christ, God was accomplishing His plan. And then finally, He only answers prayers that are in keeping with His will. Matthew chapter 6, verses 9 and 10. After this manner, therefore, pray ye, Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. That's the right context in which to pray. Any prayer should always be, this is my desire, but thy will be done. James 4:3 says, Ye ask and receive not because ye ask amiss, that ye may consume it upon your lust. You can ask for things that you don't get because they're not in the will of God, because He knows they're not good for you. 1 John 5:14 and 15, this is the confidence that we have in Him, that if we ask anything according to His will, He heareth us. So, that's a good thing. You can be thankful that God doesn't answer prayers that aren't in keeping with His will. But you think about how prayer works, and that again, that it becomes kind of hard to understand, because on the one hand, our prayers affect God's actions. And that's true. Our prayers avail much. On the other hand, He only answers prayers in His will. How do those two things go together? Well, for one thing, God has more than one way to accomplish His will. But it seems like a paradox. And it is. Remember what I said about paradoxes when we started into this series on Bible doctrines. It's this paradox of how prayer works is part of a larger paradox, okay? How does God accomplish His sovereign plan through the exercise of man's free will? There's another paradox there. The bottom line is we cannot fully reconcile those two things, because the reconciliation is found within God Himself. Only He fully understands how both work at the same time, but they do. So we want to do what I suggested at the beginning of the series: maintain both sides of the paradox and adore the mind of God. If you swing too far towards sovereignty and leaving out free will, then you'll end up in determinism and you'll be making God the author of sin. If you swing too far the other direction, to the other side and to the free will of human beings and leaving out God's sovereignty, then you'll take God off of His throne and you'll make salvation into a work of man instead of a work of God. So we don't want to swing too far to either side. We stay right there in the center, and we understand that God has His ways of accomplishing His plan through the free choice that He has given to the human race. Okay, we're going to get into Christology next time. I accomplished my goal for the evening. Let's go ahead and take out our prayer sheets, take some prayer requests.